I wanted to do a video on the misconceptions of autism. I'm so passionate about this. This riles me. And it riles me because I used to actually be misinformed too. And I've also done a video as to why people have a limited view on what autism is. Please go check that out if that is something that you are interested in. But the reason it upsets me and it riles me is because if we do not challenge our view of what autism is, we will continue to be misinformed and we will continue to only diagnose a select few, and that is not okay. The reason that is not okay is because so many people, children and adults, are suffering in silence with no idea why until they happen to come across this information. And it's great that we're in a time and a day and an age where we get to inform ourselves, get really clear, and have professionals who are either autistic themselves, because that's really important, or very informed to be able to advocate and support and diagnose people who don't fall into the typical presentation of autism. But, number two, autistic people do not experience empathy or emotions. Oh my god, this makes me so uncomfortable that people think this is true. Please go away, form your own opinions and do your own research. But the people who experience a lack of empathy, although it was suggested at one time that that was autistic people, we now know that that is not true. They may have empathy differences, but they do not lack empathy. And the people who lack empathy are people who are part of the dark tetrad, or I think it's also called the dark quad. Again, go away and do your own research. I might input a picture here of just what that is. But that's like your narcissistic personality disorder, your psychopathic personality disorders, and Machiavellian? Not Machiavellian. Yeah, Machiavellianism. And they, again, present very differently. However, the reason I want to go into this is because if you believe that the presentation of autism is that you lack empathy, if somebody shows empathy, well, they can't possibly be autistic then, can they? But that's not true. So I've spoke about this in another video too, but there is the hyper profile, which is extreme sensitivity to, or hypo, which is a lack of sensitivity to, and you might crave stimulus in that area. But this is also true when it comes to empathy. The empathy differences that I see, and again, I'm not going to talk from everybody else's point of view, but the ones that I experience, my son experiences, and often my clients experience, is actually a hyper, so an incredible sensitivity to the feeling in the room. Not necessarily knowing how to navigate that or responding in the way that people expect you to. I've come across so many clients, including my own son, not that he's a client, and including myself, who spent a lifetime with question marks, where question marks did not need to be, with a lack of support, when support was so obviously needed, but it did not look in the typical fashion or presentation that people are used to. So let's dive into it. Number one, everybody's a little bit autistic. I actually remember witnessing this happen when I was working with an autistic teenage girl. Fantastic, amazing person she was. And it infuriated her. And I got really curious. I wasn't the one to have said this, but she got furious, and now I understand why. I think, and again, somebody can correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, I think the intention is meant well. I think it's very ableistic of a view, but the intention I'm assuming behind it is, well, don't worry, let's minimize it a bit. We're all a bit on the spectrum, aren't we? However, it's really invalidating. It almost suggests that you don't need support because we're all a bit on the spectrum and we all seem to be managing, and it invalidates the real struggle that is attached to the difficulties that you will face if you are autistic. And I know I say this all the time, but you're going to hear me say it again. Living in a world that is actually disabling, further disabling, because it is not set up for you. It is set up for neurotypical people to thrive, not neurodivergent people to thrive. Again, I can go into this in more detail if people want me to, but I think it's also important to note here as well that the double empathy problem, again, there's so many really interesting videos on that. Go away and have a look at that. But also the fact that there is a difference between different types of empathy. So the things that I've discovered are there is a thing called cognitive empathy. So you understand the fundamentals of how this is meant to work. And then there is the emotional empathy. And I think for the most part, people expect you to have both. But again, I'm assuming that they expect it to look and present in a certain way. Something else that I've noticed is my empathy could be seen as quite flat. It's not flat in the sense that I don't care. I always care. But I care about everything in equal measure because my empathy sits inside right and wrong. And I've discovered quite recently, actually, that a lot of other people's empathy doesn't sit like that. So I was having a conversation with my husband's parents about this, and they was talking about how empathy sits inside loyalty. So if it looks similar to you, if it feels similar to you, if it's within your circle, you're going to feel extreme levels of empathy towards that. And the penny dropped, so to speak. I was like, oh my God, yes, this is what I witness and see all the time. Whereas for me, the reason people often have a problem with me, and actually it ends up becoming a real big social challenge for me, and has been historically, is that I don't have any more empathy for you if you are in my inner circle. I love you dearly. Let me just make that really, really clear. But if you do something that I think is morally wrong, that's not going to sit well with me, and I am going to say that. I personally, and my son is very much like this too, I personally don't believe in different rules for different people. And that includes everything that lives here. So I treat the flowers that are growing with the same amount of empathy and care as I do the ants on the ground, as the dog in the street, as my mum, as the person I don't know, as a person across the world who looks different to me. Because a lot of the way that I'm wired up is to do with my moral judgment on what I believe, and I know that's a me thing, of what is right and wrong. But can you see how that can be seen as a huge empathy difference, and that can be quite challenging for a lot of people to accept? I don't lack empathy, but my empathy looks different. Number 3 is that autistic people don't want to connect with others. This is so disappointing that people think this is true. This is not true. They don't always know how to connect with others, but they so deeply and desperately want to connect with other people. And this is actually often one of the underpinning reasons why people begin to mask and then have false connection, because they're pretending to be somebody else, and then again that leads into not having a sense of self. It leads to so many problems that people genuinely believe that they don't want to connect. And the reason why a lot of autistic people isolate is 2 things. It's them re-regulating. They need that time on their own. Actually, it's not bad. It's not bad. Even if you don't want to be alone and you don't like to be alone, please don't judge it as bad. Being on their own is not bad. However, if they're over-isolating, again, it can be just a protective measure because they are so sick of being disappointed and trying and failing. And not failing because they're not attempting to, but failing because them and that other person are just not matching up, or they're being judged heavily. But people who are on the autistic spectrum do want love and connection and attachment. They are human beings. Please don't see them any less than that. Number 4. This one really stresses me out. Children with autism are just naughty. It stops me being able to think properly. That it bothers me that much. It paralyzes me that people think this. The reason actually this stresses me out might not be the reason that you think it is. Yes, do I believe that behaviour, I personally view behaviour as a symptom and a presentation telling you that something's wrong. I don't just believe that for the most part, and I'm not saying everything and not every time, but for the most part, that it's not just like I'm making a choice and I just don't care about the consequences of that, and I don't care about how it makes anybody feel. Usually, if there is an anger outburst or a meltdown, I'm talking about obviously the autistic community, but actually anybody, there's usually, if you dig well enough, there is normally a list of things that have happened before it that end up being the reason that this has happened. However, that isn't the only reason why this one really riles me. It's because actually there's so many more than I can count autistic people who are so morally tied, and they sit inside the right and wrong, and they follow rules, and they have shutdowns rather than meltdowns that get missed because, well, they're not naughty. And I happen to be one of these children. In fact, they're often more well behaved. And if you don't believe that autistic people can be well behaved, rule following, and obedient, and I say obedient lightly because I hate that word, naturally, sense of justice, and also the idea that actually everyone is equal. But if you believe that that isn't possible, you are going to miss so many autistic children and autistic adults, because actually for many, as long as they understand why the rules are the way that they are and the rules make good sense, like let's not hurt people, they are going to follow that, not just loosely, but to a T. That is the reason why judging autistic children and autistic adults by how much you think that they are naughty, you are missing so many of them. And number 5 is that autism's increasing, and it didn't exist in my day. That's my regulating breath, if you wasn't aware. I do that regularly. My husband actually spotted that. I didn't even notice I did that. And yeah, that's not true. That is fundamentally not true. It's actually, for all the reasons why I have suggested all the misconceptions of it so far, if you have a very narrow view of what it is, which would be usually young white boys who present in a certain way, and it is often coupled with an intellectual disability or a learning disability too, then you've missed a bunch of people, which is not a them problem. And that is the reason why you believe it's increasing. Actually, our knowledge on it is just increasing. Our awareness on it is increasing. And therefore, more people are being taken care of properly by getting an appropriate diagnosis and not an inappropriate diagnosis. I'm going to cut the video there because I think that that's enough to kind of... I've got another 5 and I might do a second video, like a part 2 on this. But I think that's enough information to kind of process. If you're anything like me, I don't process in the moment. I need to go away and think about it and have my aha and epiphany moments. But what other ones would you add? Because if you're watching this, I'm assuming that you're actually interested in this subject. And if you wasn't, you probably either didn't click on it or are not watching so far. You probably got bored. What other ones would you add that really stress you out, or you feel like there needs to be more education and understanding around? I will make a part 2, so please tune in for that. But I would love to hear your thoughts. Speak soon.